Yeah, our CBS News partners revealing some new GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, tracking the movements of the boat Nolan Wells was on before he disappeared July 4th.
On the morning of July 4th, Nolan Wells boarded a boat with his friends for a holiday trip to Horn Island, a remote barrier island off the coast of Mississippi. By that afternoon, the boat left the island without him. His body was found on Horn Island days later, and the people who were supposed to bring him home gave investigators an account of his last moments that directly contradicts the account given by the last person who actually spoke with him. This is what is confirmed. This is what remains unresolved. And this is why a family in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, is still waiting for the truth about how a 4th of July boat trip ended the way it did. Nolan Wells had grown up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. His coaches and teammates describe him with a consistency that is rare and telling. A young man who showed up, who worked, who was known in his community in the kind of way that fills AI room at a homegoing service and makes strangers across the country follow a case they have no personal connection to. He was the kind of person whose absence registers immediately, not just to the people who loved him, but to a community that had watched him grow up, play football, and become the young man his coaches remembered with pride. The same community that had once gathered to celebrate his signing day was now being asked to gather again for an entirely different reason. That contrast alone tells you something about the kind of person Nolan Wells was and what his loss actually meant to the people around him. On the morning of July 4th, the boat carrying Nolan and his friends left its dock at 9:56 in the morning. By 11:14, it had reached Horn Island. For several hours, the group stayed together on the island, spending the holiday the way thousands of people were spending it that same afternoon along that same stretch of Gulf Coast. It was an ordinary summer holiday, people on the water, people on the sand, a barrier island that sees crowds every 4th of July from families and friends, groups who have been making the same trip for years. At 4:31 that afternoon, according to GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat left Horn Island. Nolan was not on it. That single confirmed fact is where the straightforward part of this case ends. Everything that follows is either unresolved, contradicted, or still sitting in the hands of investigators who have not yet given this family a complete answer. There were two first-hand accounts of Nolan's last documented words on that island. The first came from his friends who told investigators that Nolan had chosen to stay behind of his own free will, in his own words, intending to remain on the island without them. That was their account. That was what they told investigators. The second account came from a young woman named Katie who had spoken with Nolan on the beach that afternoon and whose account was eventually confirmed publicly by her own mother, Gracie McCormick. According to Katie, Nolan told her he was planning to rejoin his friends and get back on the boat before they left, that he intended to leave the island with them, that going home was the plan. Both of those accounts cannot be accurate. One of them is wrong, and sitting behind that single word, wrong, is a family who has to live with not knowing which version of their son's last conscious decision is the true one. If Katie's version is accurate, then something happened in the space between Nolan stating his clear intention to leave the island and the boat actually pulling away without him. Something interrupted whatever plan he had in that window of time. Something that nobody on that boat has explained. If the friend's version is accurate, then Nolan made a deliberate and fully conscious choice to remain alone on a remote barrier island as his only ride home departed without him, which raises an entirely different set of questions about what happened to him in the hours that followed, alone, without the group he had spent the entire day with, on an island, with no regular ferry service and no simple way to get back to the mainland. This is not a theory pulled from social media. It is not speculation built from a comment section. It is a direct, documented contradiction between two separate, first-hand accounts given by two sets of people who were both present on that island, describing Nolan's stated intentions in two ways that simply cannot both be true at the same time. And as of now, no one with the actual authority to formally resolve that contradiction has done so. Katie's name took nearly 2 weeks to surface publicly in any meaningful way. While online speculation chased down unrelated footage, out-of-context video, clips and photographs that turned out to be from an entirely different date, though one person who may have spoken with Nolan last sat almost completely unidentified in public coverage of the case. That is a significant gap. and it did not close until her mother, Gracie McCormack, chose to post publicly to correct what was beginning to spread about her daughter online in ways she had not anticipated and never expected. According to McCormack, Katie had been on Horn Island that day, had spent time with Nolan, and the two had parted ways sometime that afternoon. She said goodbye to him. She got on a different boat. She left the island safely and arrived home. To a mother who had no idea at the time that her daughter's name would soon sit at the center of one of the most discussed cases in the country, McCormack was clear that her daughter had no knowledge of anything that happened to Nolan after they parted ways and had been reachable the entire time. She was never missing. That particular fear that there might be two people unaccounted for on that island had spread on the very first night when Nolan's mother, Christine, was on the phone, trying to piece together where her son was, and Katie's name came up almost by accident as someone Nolan had wanted to stay behind with, followed immediately by the terrifying suggestion that Katie herself might also be gone. A mother already searching for one missing child suddenly told there might be two, no name two. Attached to the second worry, no number to call, just more fear stacked on top, a fear that already had nowhere to go. That particular fear turned out to be unfounded, but it tells you something about how the very first night of this case unfolded for a family trying to understand what they were dealing with in real time. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the Wells family, has confirmed that Katie's account of that final conversation is specific, has not changed, and conflicts directly with what Nolan's friends told investigators. Both sides of that contradiction are now documented. The family knows both versions exist, and they are left holding two accounts of their son's last decision, unable to know which. One is real. That is a particular kind of pain that sits differently from grief itself. Grief, as devastating as it is, at least has a shape. You know what you have lost. But this is something else entirely. This is not knowing your own son's last choice. Did he choose to stay on that island, or did he intend to come home? For most families, that would be an easy question. Pieces would come together quickly from a dozen small confirmations that never even register as important until they are suddenly needed. For Christine and Elmore Wansley, it has become the single hardest unanswered question in their son's entire case, and nobody has been able to hand them a real answer yet. Beyond that central contradiction, the Wells family has raised a series of smaller details that individually might appear unremarkable, but that refuse to stay quiet when you hold them together. Start with something as simple as a piece of clothing. The official police report lists Nolan wearing black shorts at the time of his disappearance. According to Christine Wansley, a young woman who was on the island that day, later reached out to her directly and shared photographs showing Nolan in blue shorts, not black. On its own, it sounds minor, a clerical error, a misremembered detail in a fast-moving investigation involving multiple people and a chaotic afternoon. But try to see it the way a mother sees it, a mother who no longer has the ability to simply ask her son what he was wearing that day, where he was going, what his plan was. For her, that detail is not a footnote to move past. It is a thread. And once you begin pulling on even one thread in a case built almost entirely on other people's recollections, you cannot help but look carefully for the next one. Then there is what happened when Nolan's parents went to retrieve his car from a friend's driveway, a task that should have been simple and should have taken minutes. According to the family, it was neither. A friend came to the door and said he could not find the keys. He went back inside to look. Minutes passed, the kind of minutes that feel endless when you are standing on someone else's porch, waiting with your son somewhere out there and no way to reach him and no information arriving fast enough to keep up with the fear. Eventually the keys turned up, sitting on top of an Xbox inside the house, exactly where another person, overheard on a phone call during those same minutes, had mentioned they had been the entire time. For a family already desperate for anything resembling a straightforward answer, a delay like that does not read as coincidence. It reads like friction showing up at the exact moment they needed things to be simple. And friction at that specific moment means something different than friction at any other point in this story. And then there is Nolan's phone. According to a family friend who tracked the device using a monitoring application, Nolan posted to Snapchat almost every single day. The kind of consistent, casual digital habit so embedded in daily life that it does not register as a habit at all until it stops. In the 24 hours before he disappeared, that activity went completely silent. No updates, no posts, nothing. A silence that everyone close to him agrees was simply not consistent with who he was or how he used his phone. When the device was eventually located, one additional detail surfaced that the family has not been able to account for. The location tied to the account did not match the place where the phone itself was ultimately found. A device that had been, by every account, an open and constant record of Nolan's daily life, went dark for exactly the window of time his family would give almost anything to fully understand. None of these details, taken individually, tell us what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island, but together they are the reason his family says they cannot accept. The current official account is complete, and they are the reason Christine and Elmore Wansley have continued every single day since their son was found to ask questions that no one with the authority to answer them has answered fully. Now to the GPS data, because this is the one part of the story that was not shaped by anyone's memory, anyone's loyalty, anyone's fear, or anyone's version of events. It is simply a record of where a boat went hour by hour on the day Nolan Wells disappeared. The boat left Horn Island at 4:31 in the afternoon. It returned to its original dock. Then, rather than staying there, it kept moving. At 5:52 in the evening, the yerba boat traveled into Fort Bayou. By 6:06, it was back at the dock again. Later that same night at 7:19, its track position shifted one more time to the Fort Bayou boat launch where, according to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources data, it was taken out of the water entirely and moved over land, presumably towed by a vehicle to a residence in Biloxi owned by the boat's owners. 4 separate movements, automatically recorded across several hours, ending more than 70 miles from where the day began. Not a simple trip home after a long holiday on the water, but a sequence of stops and movements across an extended stretch of time. During the exact hours when Nolan Wells was somewhere on or near Horn Island, unaccounted for, with no way to reach the mainland on his own. That GPS sequence is what investigators are still working to fully explain. And it is what Nolan's parents replay in their minds over and over, looking for what might have happened inside it. On July 15th, Christine and Elmore Wansley sat down face-to-face with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers, their first direct meeting with her office since Nolan's body had been found. Ben Crump described the meeting afterward as respectful and candid, a meaningful shift after more than a week of the family feeling like they were on the outside of their own son's case. Out of that meeting came confirmation that once the DA's investigation concludes, its findings will go before a grand jury. It is worth being precise about what that phrase actually means, because it carries more emotional weight than its legal definition justifies. A grand jury. Referral is not a verdict. It is not a formal accusation against any specific person. It does not mean charges have been filed. It does not mean investigators have concluded a crime took place. What it means is that the case has reached a procedural point where its findings will be formally reviewed to determine whether charges are warranted at all. It is a mechanism, a process. It is movement, but it is not resolution. And this family already knows better than anyone the difference between those two words. Crump also addressed something that had spread widely online. The claim that the FBI had effectively taken over this investigation and removed local law enforcement from the lead role. According to an official statement from FBI, the Bureau has assisted Jackson County investigators with specific elements of the case centered largely on threats made against individuals connected to the investigation, threats that crossed state lines and therefore fell under federal jurisdiction. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has remained the lead agency throughout, from the very first search to whatever comes next. The FBI's role has been support, not command. That distinction matters, and it needed to be corrected clearly. Nolan's phone, the one piece of evidence his family has pointed to from nearly the very beginning as potentially holding real answers, became the subject of a formal agreement at the July 15th meeting. A joint inspection was agreed to, with experts representing the Wells family working alongside experts connected to the official investigation, examining the device together in real time rather than releasing competing statements from separate analyses. Attorney Eric Hertz is leading that effort on the family's side, working with former law enforcement professionals brought in specifically for the technical work involved. As of this recording, that inspection had not yet taken place. The family is still waiting. The way they have been waiting in one form or another since the night their son did not come home. Two pieces of misinformation spread far enough and fast enough that they require direct correction, because both of them shaped what large numbers of people believed about this case before anyone verified whether they were actually true. The first was a photograph of Nolan at a pool party that began circulating after his body was found. For a period of time, a significant number of people genuinely believed it was evidence that Nolan had been alive after July 4th. That, the photo, proved something hopeful. Strangers were sharing it with hope attached to it. A young grieving family had to watch that happen in real time, knowing the photograph was not what people believed it was, and having to say so publicly again and again, while simultaneously planning a funeral. Rolling Stone confirmed through image, metadata, and a direct statement from his friend Tristan Shepard that the photograph had been taken on June 27, a full week before Nolan ever went to Horn Island. It had been uploaded online on July 5th, which is what created the confusion about its timing. The photograph was real. The timeline people attached to it was not. The second was a video that many believed captured Nolan in an argument in the period shortly before he vanished, a recording that spread with the weight of a missing piece as though it explained something fundamental about what had happened. Tristan Shepard addressed that directly as well. The voice on the recording was his own, not Nolan's. Both corrections have been made publicly and clearly. What remains once you strip both of them away is what was always underneath them from the beginning. An unresolved contradiction between two first-hand accounts, a GPS sequence across 4 separate locations, a phone that went silent, a family waiting for answers that have not arrived. The case is still open. The grand jury has not concluded. The phone inspection has not happened. The contradiction between what Katie told investigators and what Nolan's friends told investigators has not been resolved by anyone with the authority to resolve it. The GPS movements in the hours after 4:31 have not been fully explained publicly, and Nolan's family is still doing what they have done since July 4th, asking the same questions, waiting for the same answers, and finding that the process moves on its own timeline, regardless of the urgency. Sitting behind every single day they spend without knowing the truth. Christine Wansley announced that her son's homegoing celebration would be held on July 20th at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, the same community that watched Nolan grow up, the same place that knew him, asked to come together now for the worst possible reason. Underneath every GPS timestamp, every legal term, every grand jury reference, and FBI statement, there is still just a family trying to understand how a holiday afternoon on the water ended with their son gone, a mother and a father who have not received a complete, truthful, fully verified account of what happened to their child, two parents who are not asking for theories or versions or accounts that conflict with each other. They are asking for what every family in their position deserves, the truth, all of it, told clearly, without anything added that is not actually known and without anything removed that is. That is what Nolan Wells deserves, and that is what his family is still waiting for.